Welcome to the Section 111 podcast with your host, TJ Shoemaker.
Welcome to episode 5 of the Section 111 podcast. I'm your host, TJ Shoemaker, and I'm joined today by Dan Thompson of the Stadium and Gale podcast and also of GatorCountry.com. Dan, how's it going, man?
It's going great. Thanks so much for having me on, TJ. I'm excited to talk to you.
Yeah, man, I'm really excited too. I'm excited that I get to talk Gators with somebody. You know, living up here in West Virginia, I don't really get that opportunity too often.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, you've had kind of a rash of Gator coaches go up there coaching at Marshall, and so it's good to have somebody from Huntington come down south and talk about the Gators. And you know, we're super excited, and it's cool to see that the Gator Nation's everywhere.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny that you bring that up because Dallas Baker is actually the wide receivers coach right now.
Yeah,
Marshall,
absolutely.
So that's pretty cool.
And Doc Holliday's still there, right?
Yeah, Doc's there. Yeah. He's on like a 7 or 8 game bowl winning streak. So he's doing big things up here.
And I know Heater was up there. He's Chuck Heater. He was a former Gators defensive back coach. He's actually back at Florida now as a quality control coach. And then Emily Heater, who was his daughter, and then my boss when I worked for UF from 2006 to 2010 when I was in college. She was the on-campus recruiting director. Her husband, Sean Cronin, who was a graduate assistant at UF when I was there, coaching football, coached up there as well. So you had a whole bunch of players rush up to, or a whole bunch of coaches rush up to Huntington there when Doc Holliday went up there. So it's cool, and I'm excited about Dallas Baker. He was there my freshman year. Still one of my favorite players of all time. So that's cool, and I wish him a ton of success.
Yeah, I really like Dallas a lot, and I actually got to watch Marshall's practice last Friday, and some of the receivers were making some unbelievable catches, and I mean, you gotta give that guy credit for what they're doing there.
Yeah, it's cool, and what's also really cool is, you know, Marshall had a quarterback, Chase Linton. I guess he graduated a little bit ago. When did he graduate? Just recently now?
He entered the draft after. Not last season, but the season before.
Okay, perfect. So I actually got to know Chase quite a bit when I was doing some stuff for Gator Country, and I was covering one of the 7-on-7 events down at the IMG Academy down in Bradenton, and got to know him. And then his brother was a student at UF at the time, and he was there, and I got to meet him, and we got to follow Chase's recruitment a bit. And I know that he was really looking at Florida when Will Muschamp was still there. And he really liked Florida. It didn't work out timing-wise. I know he ended up going to junior college before enrolling at Marshall, but he was a great dude. I'm glad to see that he did well. And he actually came across my Twitter timeline the other day because he's exchanging jerseys with somebody in one of the NFL games. So glad to see that he's getting to live his dream out. He's a great guy.
Yeah, he was actually a high school teammate of Vernon Hargraves. And, you know, there was some talk that maybe he might end up at Florida, but like you said, that didn't work out. But, yeah, he had a pretty good career at Marshall, and he actually declared for the draft a year early. And Marshall ended up starting a redshirt freshman quarterback last year, and he's kind of primed to have a good sophomore campaign this year.
Excellent. And I'm always rooting for Doc Holliday. He was a great guy. I got to know him during my time at UF, and always want to support him. He opened some doors for me, which I'm appreciative of. And heck, I have no other rooting interest in the Mid-Atlantic to Northeast, so you know, go Thundering Herd.
Yes, sir. All right, so this is going to be kind of a Florida-based episode. So obviously, there's a big game coming up. I kind of wanted to start with that. So my first question for you is what's your biggest concern going into this game?
You know, I'm not too concerned. I think that Florida has the better team, both on paper and in practice. I think that they've got a coaching staff that has been here a little bit longer. But more importantly than just having been at Florida longer, they've worked together for a while. You know, Dan Mullen's the type of guy that really doesn't have a lot of turnover on his coaching staffs. And, you know, they've been together, they've coached together for a long, long time. And, you know, I think that there's a lot of question marks still at Miami. I think that Miami could be a good program in the future. I think that Manny Diaz could be a good head coach. I think that Danny Enos, their offensive coordinator, could be a good offensive coordinator. I just don't know if I see it right away. They have a lot of question marks on offensive line. They've got some question marks at quarterback. They're starting a quarterback, and that's only throwing 3 passes. So I'm not sure that there's a ton of concern on my end. This is I do have some eyebrow raising moments, I guess. So number one is the offensive line. You're replacing 4 of your 5 starters on the offensive line. And then you had Gene DeLance, who was your starting, I believe, right tackle. He has an injury where he's on crutches right now. So depending on how serious that is, Florida could be starting not only another guy that didn't start last year, but another guy that has less experience than Gene DeLance does. So that's a concern because Miami does have a really good front 7 on the defensive side of the ball. But other than that, I think that Florida does have a really strong roster to compete with just about every positive that I think Miami has outside of offensive line versus defensive line. I think that Florida checks the box against as having just as good, if not better, of an opposing quality. So whether it's Miami's wide receivers with Florida's defensive backs, whether it's Florida's quarterbacks wide receivers against Miami's defensive backs, whether it's running backs versus, that back, 5 of linebackers and safeties, I like Florida's better. So, I think that Florida wins this game by 2 scores. So I'm not too concerned.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. Not a whole lot of concerns for me. And like you, my biggest concern is probably nothing that they have per se, but mainly just our offensive line and, the lack of experience on it. I mean, you got Nick Buchanan at center, Brett Heggie that has a lot of experience at guard, but outside of that, not a lot of experience. And the biggest thing...
I'll say this. They don't have a ton of starting experience, but they do have guys that have played quite a bit. So it's not like they're just starting a bunch. Fortunately, they're not just starting a lot of, redshirt freshmen,
right,
sophomores, etc. It's just but the good thing is they've been guys that have been in college weight program for the last 3-4 years. So that's, a positive. But like you mentioned, there is some question marks there, and you're not sure. It sounds like it should be good, right? Like you have guys that are in their 3rd year. They should be pretty good, but you also have to wonder maybe why they didn't play a ton last year either, right?
Right, yeah. And I mean, really more specifically with the offensive line is, can they get off the first block and get up to the second level and really put some pressure on the Miami linebackers? Because that's a real big strength for Miami this year is their linebacking core. Yep. Probably one of the best in the country with, you got Zach McLeod, Shaq Quarterman, Michael Pinckney. They're pretty loaded at that position. So I think that not only is Florida's offensive line going to have to block, but they're going to have to at times get up to the second level and really open up some holes for Piron and Malik Davis.
I do think that the one thing that Florida has going for them, though, on offense, besides with the points that you just mentioned, I think with the way that they're going to counter this, is they have a ton of potential at the skill positions. They have some unbelievable players that you have to watch out for. And while, yes, they might be getting overhyped by us over at Stadium and Gale or by, some of the beat writers, when you think of Florida's wide receivers, when you think about their potential at tight end, and when you think about running back, Miami's going to have to do a lot to probably spread their team out quite a bit. So I don't imagine a lot of situations where Miami's going to really be able to put themselves in packages where they know it's a designed run play or where they can sneak a safety in because they're not afraid of a wide receiver going over the top. I think because Florida has folks like Cleveland and Grimes and Jefferson and, at the with you can add in Kadarius Toney, you can add in Jacob Copeland, who has gotten a ton of praise over the last few days, and then you add in somebody like Kyle Pitts at tight end or Lucas Kroll, who are these, kind of fast, rangy guys that are going to spread the field out. I think that that's what Florida's going to do to potentially offset Miami really being able to maximize that defensive line and linebackers that they have, because they're going to have to be able to compensate with, Felipe Franks, who took a lot of steps towards the end of last season during the spring and this summer, to be able to check out of that. I think there's a lot of confidence in his ability to do that. And now you have to worry about, we have the wrong positions on the wrong players on the field, the wrong package on the field, and we might now get beat over the top. So they might be a little timid. And I also trust Dan Mullen against Manny Diaz, considering that he had to let him go twice.
Yeah, and kind of piggybacking off of your points there, don't forget about last year with Jordan Scarlett, as good of a running back as he was, and I love Jordan Scarlett, he was a liability when it came to catching the ball out of the backfield. So this year with, P. Ryan, Davis, I like the ability for the running backs to get out wide and maybe hit them on a swing pass, kind of make their linebackers run sideline to sideline, and kind of open some things up and get some one-on-one matchups.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I like Florida I sound like a homer, and maybe I am, and maybe I just don't realize it.
No, man, you're good.
But I truly love Florida's skill positions, and I know that they're not Alabama's, right? And I know that there's probably some other teams that are really solid. But when you consider LaMichael P. Ryan, who had a really great season last year and probably would have been drafted in the NFL draft, come back, and then you add Dameon Pierce, who when he touched the ball, I know he touched a lot in the fourth quarter, but he was a 6, 7, 8 yard per carry type of guy. And then you're bringing Malik Davis back, who was injured last year with a torn ACL. He's back at full speed. And when he was running full speed as a freshman, he was averaging 8 yards a carry. So now you have a lot of things. And then if you throw in Iverson Clement, the redshirt freshman from New Jersey, who's been getting some playing time, now you have a lot of threats at the running back position. And then again, if you're trying to compensate for those guys, then you have Van Jefferson, Tyree Cleveland, Kadarius Toney, Jacob Copeland. I'm sure I'm forgetting a whole slew of other players that are potentially out there.
Did you mention Grimes?
Yeah, Grimes. Yeah, there's a lot of things that you have to compensate for, and that's not saying that Florida is this like unbelievable, Megatron team. That's not at all what it means.
Right.
It just means like for the first time probably since 2008.
09.
Yeah.
08 since we had Percy. Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't want to compare, and I want to make this clear. And we had who did we have on the podcast? We had Eric Wilbur on the podcast. We had Brandon James. That's who it was on the podcast last year.
Yeah, Brandon.
And Brandon James was talking about just how great Percy Harvin was, and I don't think people realize that. It's my opinion that if Percy Harvin was healthy, he could have gone down as probably one of the top 5 college players of all time. And I think if he could have stayed healthy, I think that he would have been an NFL Hall of Famer. There's just something special about Percy Harvin. I say all that to say I don't think that Florida has a Percy Harvin on their team, but if you add in all of the pieces that they have on their team, I think that you have a roster that for the first time has some true legitimate weapons, and for the first time in a long time has options at each different position. It's not like there's just one guy that you can double cover and be like, all right, well, like as long as we've got Demarcus Robinson covered, we're good. It's what are you going to do? Because if you stack a safety over for additional coverage on Jefferson or Grimes, then do you open it for a Lucas Kroll or a tight end to be able to run that seam down the middle?
Pitts,
and then if you don't, then now you have Trayvon Grimes running, one-on-one against a defensive back, and at 6'5" and a guy that probably runs a 4.42, 4.45. Good luck, right? So I'm excited.
Yeah, I mean, Florida's definitely loaded this year, and not only do they have good talent, but the experience is there. Like Georgia has a lot of talent, but not a whole lot of experience coming back this year. That's something that Florida does have, and I mean, man, I'm excited for it.
Yeah, and there's a huge potential chance there, but there is a lot of question marks still. We have to see them all put it together. Trayvon Grimes had a great spring game, had a great summer, having a great fall. Again, didn't put up huge, gaudy numbers last year. Tyree Cleveland fell off a bit last year. Two guys that I'm completely forgot that I didn't mention is Josh Hammond and Freddie Swain. Old reliable, right? They're your 401k options, as Ahmad and I call them. They're guys that are going to consistently go out there and produce. The two of them combined haven't dropped a pass since the season before last. So those are guys that you can count on. So those are good options, right? And again, you may not have a Percy Harvin, a Reggie Bush, a Jerry Jeudy, one of those electric playmakers out there, but you definitely have a lot of options that are going to force teams to scheme, and it's going to be a challenge.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, and when you factor in not only that many playmakers, but Felipe Frank's ability to run the ball and his willingness to run the ball now. I mean, once he figured out that last season, it was like a switch flipped, and he just took off. And I'm excited about what Felipe is going to do this season.
Yeah, I mean, once he started running the ball with purpose, you could tell he started to run that offense with a lot more confidence in himself. Felipe Franks is a guy that's never lacked confidence. I got to meet him when he was 16 years old, and he came out to Friday Night Lights, and him and his brother Jordan, who ended up playing tight end at UCF, and I think he's in the NFL right now. Very confident guy. I think the problem is he was never able, he didn't have the skill set refined to be able to play right away. And so when he was thrust in there, he was a guy that had a lot of confidence, but his confidence didn't necessarily match his ability. You throw in Brian Johnson. I know a lot of people give Dan Mullen credit. Dan Mullen is an unbelievable quarterback coach. He's done wonderful things, but I don't think enough people give Brian Johnson credit for the work that he's done with not only Felipe Franks, but with Kyle Trask and Emory Jones. And I'll be damned to tell you, Emory Jones is a hell of a lot better passer now than he was at this point last year. I mean, we're talking, eons better. And so, now that skill set is matching, his confidence, once he shushed the crowd against South Carolina, he's been a completely different player. Yes, he runs like a giraffe, but beyond that, he is a runner that's not afraid to get hit, which you have to be careful with. But he's a guy that's not afraid to get hit. He also has been able to read, hey, this is my time to run because this play is broken down. I still think that he needs to get off of locking in on that number one wide receiver, and I think he's done, or on his number one target on that route. But if he can get past that, he can really be I said it today on the Gator panel that we had, I think that he could be a good quarterback, good to great quarterback, and that's really all Dan Mullen needs his quarterbacks to be.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, especially with the defense that we have and the playmakers around Felipe, he really just needs to be good. I mean, he doesn't even have to be great; just be good, especially in the big games. Just take care of the football, and I think that Florida could have a lot of success this season.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So you kind of already answered my next question, which was, what are you most optimistic about? It sounds like we're pretty optimistic about the playmakers. So.
Yeah, I'm optimistic about them. I'm optimistic to see what Dan Mullen does. I think one of the advantages, as I said at the beginning of the podcast, is that Florida's not changing up their coaching staff. This is a coaching staff that knows each other and knows how to play off of each other really well. So, I'm excited to see what they do when it comes to trick plays and, opening up that playbook. When you consider last year, they really only had 8 or 9 months to learn the playbook, and now they've added, an additional year on top of that. I'm excited to see what Dan Mullen can do. I think that he is truly an offensive genius, and so that's what I'm excited about. I don't have to worry about Florida playing, Northwestern State, School of Mines, in the first game of the season, right? It's a big game. Miami is not ranked, but it's a rivalry game. It's a school that's had Florida's number for the better part of the entire series, and so. I'm excited to see what Dan Mullen is able to roll out. And, I hope that he goes for the jugular right away. This is an opportunity to really set the tone for the beginning of the season that can carry over because I truly think that Florida has aspirations and truly legitimate aspirations of making a run at the SEC championship game. And if they can do that, then that means they're, in contention for the playoff as well.
Yeah, I mean, I guess what I'm most optimistic about is just the team as a whole entering its second year, both in the offensive scheme and the defensive scheme, and just playing faster. On offense, converting third downs and just moving the football, scoring some points, and then on defense, I want to see that defense flying around, causing turnovers like they did last year, but maybe even more so this season. So I'm really looking forward to what Todd Grantham can do with the defense, and especially with getting Marco Wilson back from injury. I think that's going to be huge.
Yeah, I think people don't realize, and you make a great point, I don't think a lot of people realize how good Marco Wilson was as a freshman. He is an incredible player. He was better than C.J. Henderson was at that point in his career.
Yeah, I agree.
and his dad is a great fundamental guy. Obviously, his brother's in the NFL, so I'm excited about Quincy or about Wilson. I'm excited to see what they can do. Their depth behind them is a little shaky, and you've got some question marks there that I'm sure we can talk about a little bit later. But with Marco Wilson being back, C.J. Henderson being there, and then Trey Dean, who has quite a bit of experience, that's a solid group of cornerbacks as well.
Yeah, definitely. And then, I mean, you look at the safeties too. While there's not, we don't have like a Matt Elam or a Reggie Nelson back there, there is a lot of experience on the back end. So, I mean, I feel pretty comfortable back there. I don't know about you.
Yeah, no, I feel comfortable with the starters. The safety position is one that I think is playing out just fine. The biggest question mark that you have there is Brad Stewart, who is probably the most talented of the players. But, all of the coaches say, and I don't know who first said it, so I'm going to say that I made this quote up, your best ability is availability. Right. And so with Stewart being out for a while, he's back with the team now and playing. That's a question mark. But they've got some great players at the safety position. And, maybe they're not world beaters, but you look at Donovan Steiner, played pretty well last year. You look at Jawan Taylor, who, had some good moments last year. Sean Davis has really stepped up, and there's some people that have compared him to Reggie Nelson. I don't know
definitely.
I don't know if I see that, but, he, has dreads and, play safety. So maybe somebody else sees it, right? So there's some question marks so I think they're solidified there. And then you have Quincy Lenton, who hasn't played much. He's had the injury bug really the entire time he's been at Florida. He's a redshirt junior now. But if he could step up, you've got some good stuff there. And then, you mentioned that we don't have a Matt Elam out there, but if I can give you his cousin, Kyer Elam.
Yeah, I'll take that.
He's a highly ranked 4-star recruited by every program in America. And, I think that he's going to play quite a bit this year. And then you add in Jaden Hill, who is another 4-star guy that they stole from Tennessee. And then you have Chester Kimbrough, who is about as thin as a toothpick, but is fast, has great use of his hands, is rangy, is a great defensive back. So I think you're going to see all of those guys. I am saddened that while I was able to get off a few snarky jokes about CJ McWilliams, and I mean, no offense to him, it is sad because I know that he was improving quite a bit this offseason. With his Achilles being out, it's sad that we're not going to be able to see him play this year. But Florida has playmakers. It's just a lot of, there's a lot of question marks against those names.
Yeah, I mean, the depth is a question mark, but like you said, the starters are very solid, and I'm looking forward to that, and especially, with getting Marco back, I want to see a ton of C.J. Henderson corner blitzes, like just inject that straight into my veins 3 or 4 times a game.
Hey, I'm here for it.
Yeah, same. All right. So kind of wrap up the Miami talk, kind of get a score prediction from you.
Yeah, I think that Florida wins by 2 touchdowns. It is the first game of the year during week 0. It's not going to be as sexy as I think that a lot of people think it's going to be, but we also were only up 13-6 against FSU in the last game of the regular season, and FSU was trash last year. So I say all that to say that I think it's going to be close for a while. I do think that Florida squeaks out, a win by 2+ scores. So I'm just going to go 31-13.
Okay. I like that. I'm actually going to go 27-10.
Okay.
So,
yeah, I think that Miami's going to miss an extra point in there, but I think that Miami has a good program. They've got some playmakers. They've got some good folks that, Jeff Thomas, I think, is a good player. They've got some decent running backs. I just think that Florida will be able to contain a lot of their weapons because they don't have to worry, potentially, we'll see. But I think that there's still a lot of question marks with Jaron Williams. And I think if Florida, is able to throw a pretty aggressive defense, which if anybody that's listening to this podcast has ever watched just 3 plays of a Todd Grantham defense knows that he's going to play with a ton of aggressiveness, then I think that that's going to rattle Miami. And I think that they're going to be, I think that Florida is just going to be comfortably ahead during the game for most of it.
Yeah, man. I definitely agree with you there. All right, so kind of moving forward to just a broader perspective, just the overall season preview. Who's a player that's kind of already established that you're expecting to have a breakout season this year?
Yeah, I'm going to say Michael Pirine. I know that a lot of people think and know that he's a a good running back, but I truly think that he's a guy that would have been drafted in the NFL draft. And, he comes from a great family, and his family wanted him to finish school. And, he trusts his abilities enough to be able to potentially move up in the NFL draft. So I think that he's going to have a great year. That's probably the guy that I would go with. He's reliable. He can catch the ball out of the backfield. He's a hustler. He moves. He's a north-south runner. He doesn't bounce around. He's not an east-west guy. He finds his hole and he takes it and he runs. So you saw that against FSU towards the end of the year. You saw it throughout the entire season last year. No offense to Jordan Scarlett, but I thought Michael Pirine should have been your RB1 all of last season. So I think that he's going to have a monster year for Florida.
Yeah, I agree with you there. And I mean, you made another good point about him being able to catch the ball out of the backfield and just his versatility in general. And, with Felipe Franks getting more comfortable in the offense, I think that's going to open up a lot more running lanes for LaMichael Pirine that maybe weren't necessarily there last season for him or Jordan Scarlett for that matter.
Yeah, I mean, the one big question that you have to ask there is, as those, tight ends, wide receivers are able to stretch the field, is your offensive line going to be able to get to that second level? And if they are and be able to open those holes, I trust LaMichael Pirine to be able to find those. But like I said, he's not a shifty runner in that he doesn't just bounce around east-west. He's a guy that finds his hole and is going to move forward. I don't think that he had many tackles behind the line of scrimmage last year. I may be wrong, and somebody can fact check me, but I'm pretty sure that he had 0 tackles behind the line of scrimmage last year. And if you can get that out of a running back that's going to run as much as he did last year, and probably the equivalent number, if not a little bit more this year, then that's a no-brainer.
Yeah, definitely. So kind of switching to the other side of the ball, is there someone on defense that's kind of already established that you look for to have a major season coming up?
Yeah, I mean, I'm truly curious about how teams are going to throw the ball against Florida. C.J. Henderson and Marco Wilson, I'm going to cheat and pick both of them. I think that C.J. Henderson is an unbelievable cornerback. Last year he wasn't picked on a ton because you had Trey Dean, who was a freshman at the time, and you had C.J. McWilliams on the other side who weren't as talented. And I'm sure neither one of them would take offense as Marco Wilson, I think, is. And so, if you can't throw the ball towards CJ because he's a first-team All-SEC, and then Marco, who I've said is better than CJ Henderson, then I don't know where you're going to throw the ball. So I see both of them having good seasons. I do think that a lot of teams are going to try to, work at that Z position, that Z wide receiver position in kind of the middle of the field. So Florida is going to need, their linebackers and their safety or that guy, that nickel, the guy that plays that star position for Florida to really step up. But the two of them, I think, are going to be able to lock down most teams. And, that's what I'm most excited about, is watching them play.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you put either Amari Burney or Trey Dean at the star position, I think that either one of those guys are going to be able to cover just about anybody. So, I mean, good luck to the opposing offenses finding a mismatch.
But see, this is what I mean. I don't want to sound like a homer, but you add all of that in, right? You have the same safeties you had last year, and you can assume that they are probably better than they were last year just by the nature of 19-year-olds get better with an additional year of practice, right? But then I think that Florida has a better pass rush, or just as good of a pass rush that they did last year with Jonathan Greenard and Jabari Zuniga. Right. And then, at the defensive tackle position, Kyrie Campbell does, he is dealing with a small light groin injury, but assuming that he comes back, you have a lot of guys you have probably 3 or 4 guys at the defensive tackle position between, Conliffe, TJ Slayton, Schuler from your area up there in West Virginia when he transferred down. So you have those guys that are going to be able to, penetrate the offensive line. I think you have 2 lockdown quarterbacks. You've got some pretty good safeties, and then you have a lot of experience at that linebacker position. Couple that with a really aggressive defensive play caller. This is what I mean. Like, I sound homerish, and I'm sure there's something that I'm missing, but like that's pretty good defense. It's pretty good defense.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm right there with you. Call me a homer too, but I'm right there with you with everything that you just said. So you were speaking facts to me.
Hey, perfect.
All right. So the next thing I wanted to get to is who's kind of more of like a under the radar player on both offense and defense that you're expecting big things from in 2019.
Yeah, I think I mentioned it a little bit with Malik Davis. He's coming back from injury. I don't think people realize how electric he was when the ball was in his hands when he was a freshman. So I think that Malik Davis is probably your standout guy that a lot of people, probably remember from freshman year and be like, oh, yeah, that guy. So I think him. And then I would say on defense, I'm going to cheat here because I know a lot of people probably know the name because he transferred in, but I'm going to say Jonathan Greener because he from the transfer from Louisville. He played with Todd Grantham earlier on in his college career, so he understands the defense pretty well. And on top of that, he was injured last year, and but from everything that I've heard, that I've seen, and people that I've talked to, is they think that he's just as good, if not better, than Ja'Kai Polite was. So if he can have even 2/3 of the season that Ja'Kai Polite had last year, that's really all they need out of him. So, for a guy that, he wasn't on the team last year, was injured last year up at Louisville, I think that he's your guy that's going to really stand out. And I think he's going to make a lot of noise coming from that defensive end, buck outside linebacker position.
Yeah, and one thing, as good as Ja'Kai Polite was last season, one thing that really bothered me with him is at times he would kind of lose contain on the outside and not really set the edge. And that's something that watching Jonathan Greenard's tape, that he does that almost every time. He's able to kind of either rush upfield and then kind of set the edge whenever he needs to. And that's something that Florida kind of missed last year and gave up a couple big plays because of it. So I'm looking forward to that this season and seeing what Jonathan Greenard can do, throughout the year.
Yeah, I mean, there's very few holes, on that defensive line. You have some question marks potentially at defensive tackle, but Jabari Zuniga had a great year last year. The stats don't necessarily show that he had an unbelievable year, but he was definitely a disruptor last year. You are replacing Ja'Kai Polite, who led the team in sacks last year by a considerable amount. I think by at least 100% more than Jabari Zuniga, who's number two. You have the players now to replace them. You add in a healthy David Reese, you add in a Jeremiah Moon, you add in all these other players, that should, allow you to be a little bit sexier on defense, if you will, where you can maybe run some stunts, or you can run these guys in some different packages that allow you to be able to get to the quarterback. And you finally got some really strong depth at your ones and most of your twos on that defense. This is one of the things that we talked about at Stadium Gales, that for the first time in a really long time, Florida has been able to go through this, spring, summer, and fall without really having to worry about who your starters are. You've given those starters a lot of playing time because you don't have question marks. The only person that they were replacing on their team that they didn't know, like in the spring, was who was going to be long snapper. If that's your only problem, you're going to enter the season, pretty good.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so kind of just moving forward a little bit more. I've got some over-unders here for you on the season, both with the team and some players. So we're going to start with number of Florida wins this season. I've got it set at 9.5. You going over or under?
Over. I said on the Gator panel 11-1. I was just getting a little aggressive. But, I'll stick with that, so I'm going to go over.
Yeah, and if you don't mind me asking, who did you have Florida losing to?
So I was able to go through that entire panel without me answering that question. I'm going to go through this entire interview without me answering that either. This is what I think. Okay. I don't know if I can pin it down, and this is my logic behind it all. Okay. If I had to pick one, I would pick Georgia. But these are my things, right? So Florida probably has three games that people are most concerned about, right? It's your Auburn game, your LSU game, and your Georgia game.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that Auburn is that good. I think that they have probably the best defensive line in college football. I think that they've got, because of that, a very solid defense. I have a ton of question marks with them on the offensive side of the ball, and I've got a ton of question marks inside the head of their head coach. LSU, kind of the same thing. I think that they've got a good defense. I think that Grant Delpit is very good. I think that they've got a lot of talent on their team on the defensive side of the ball. I don't have a ton of faith in Joe Burrow, and I just don't have a ton of faith in Ed Orgeron. And I think that Florida is a better team than they were last year, and they were able to beat LSU. And I don't think that LSU is a better team than they were last year. I think they might be the same, and I think that if that's the case, then I have Florida. Obviously, it's in Baton Rouge, so that's obviously a question mark every year. Georgia, again, a really good team, has a ton of talent. I think that Jake Fromm is a great quarterback, or is a good quarterback. I'm not sure he's a great quarterback. They're also replacing a ton of people on their team, and they've got a ton of talent. Obviously, they've recruited as one of the best programs over the last couple of years of any team in the country than Clemson and Alabama. However, there's still a lot of question marks there. So, when you look at all three of those, I then look and I think that Dan Mullen is a great head coach. I think that he has a lot of ability to be able to scheme around a lot of these teams that might be a little bit more talented than them on paper. So then you go into, is there a trip up game? Missouri is your trip up game, kind of every year. They're going to have Kelly Bryant as quarterback for them this year. I think that Barry Odom, their head coach, is a really solid coach. South Carolina, I don't think isn't going to stand much of a fighting chance.
No, and that schedule is brutal for them. So I don't really see them being much of a factor when it comes to playing us.
And Florida has a good schedule because playing in week 0, while it's unfortunate for me because I have a friend who planned a wedding a year and a half ago on August 24th up in New York. So it's unfortunate for me, but it's fortunate for them that they're going to have 3 bye weeks this year. So they play their first game. They're able to then go skiing because then I think they have 6 or 7 games in a row. And then they have a week off. And then they have Georgia, Missouri, South Carolina, I think. And then they have a week off. And then they play FSU or some sort of iteration right around that, right? So their time off is in good spots where they're able to. And then they have Towson like in the middle of a 5-game stretch, right? So you're able to get a little bit of rest. And so where your trap games normally are at the end of like playing 5, 6, 7 weeks in a row, they're not there this year because Florida is starting their season a little bit earlier.
Yeah, definitely. I'm actually going to be at the Auburn game on October 5th, so I'm definitely looking forward to that one.
That should be awesome. They're wearing their throwback jerseys or retro jerseys, whatever Nike wants to call them. They look beautiful. And it's homecoming.
I actually had a custom one made. It's a Tebow one, so it says Tebow on the back, and it's got the Jumpman logo. So that's going to be pretty sick.
It's beautiful. It's going to be a fun time, man.
Yeah, man, I can't wait. All right, so we'll kind of just go through these real quick. You can just kind of tell me over under and give me a little opinion on why you think so. But I've got Kadarius Toney total yards at 750, over or under.
I'm going to go under. It's no slight against him. I just think that Florida has too many playmakers at that wide receiver and running back position for him to get that many yards. I think that when he does get the ball, he'll be electric. But I also think that Jacob Copeland is going to be getting the ball as well, kind of in that role as well.
Yeah, I can see that too. And I'm actually going to take the over just because he had 500 last year, and I figured it up, and it's basically he just needs about 20 more yards per game, assuming that we play 13 games. That's including the bowl game. So I think that he can do it. I think that Dan Mullen's going to find a way to get Kadarius Toney a few more touches per game, and he averaged 10.9 yards per touch last season. So if he can continue that, I think that he might be able to get there. But it is going to be a tough task.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. That's not a slight against him. I think that he's an electric player. He's gotten better. Like I said, the one thing that I just see him running into is that Florida has a lot of people that that are going to be expecting the ball this year. And for the first time in a long time, there's a lot of playmakers. And, he's been able to average that many yards, obviously that many yards per touch. But then you throw in a guy like Tremont Grimes, who really came on towards the end of the season. And then in the spring, who, is now a huge new weapon. And then you have Jacob Copeland, who's going to be out there. The one thing that I like about Kadarius Toney is he can do so much. He was a quarterback. He threw a couple times last year. So I think that you might see him, get on the field and do that. So if you factor in passing yards, then I'm going to go over.
Yeah, I can definitely agree with you there. The next one I got is Jabari Zuniga over under 7.5 sacks.
That's tough. I'm just thinking about it now because he ended last season with 6.5. Yep, I'm going to go over. I'm going to go over. I don't think he's going to go much over. I think maybe 8.5 for him. But I can definitely see him having a better year than he had last year stat wise. I think that, like I said, I think that Jonathan Greenard is going to be an electric player out there. And I think because Florida is solid at the quarterback position, that's going to force the defensive line. I think that's going to force opposing teams' offensive lines to block longer. And when you block longer, it allows holes to open up to allow, for more sacks, coverage sacks, that kind of stuff to happen. So I'm going to go over.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I'm looking at probably 8.5 sacks as well. So right behind you there. The next one I got is Felipe Franks. Over under 36.5 total touchdowns.
I'll definitely go over. He really stepped up towards the end of last season. He had, I think, 36 touchdowns last year, or 31
I believe. Yeah.
Touchdowns last year. I'm going to go over. He really stepped up towards the end of last season. Florida's averaging 45 points a game. Over the last 4 games of the season, he had, let's see, 3, 6, 8. He had 8 touchdowns in the last 4 games of the year, and he only played for one part of the first half against Idaho. So I can see him, and that was passing, and then obviously he had some rushing touchdowns as well. So I'm going to definitely go over for him. I'm going to say he's going to probably be somewhere around 40, especially because, and I think he's going to get a number of those through rushing as well.
Yeah, I agree with you there. And the next one is also for Felipe Franks, and that is over under 3,400 total yards. So he had to put it in perspective, he had about 2,800 last year.
That's a lot. I think because Florida has some really strong players at running back that I'm going to go under just slightly.
Okay.
I don't know an exact number. I mean, maybe off by 200 or 300 yards. And I think part of that is because I don't think that Florida is going to use Felipe Franks to truly win them ball games. I mean, there's certainly going to be times where he really needs to step up, but I think that Felipe Franks is going to be a product of, being smart, not turning the ball over, ultimately just moving the ball forward rather than being that guy that you expect to, throw for 300 yards a game or 280 yards a game. I think that there's going to be a lot of games where he's right around that 200, 210 yards, per game. I think that he's going to rush the ball, a bit, but, Florida has a lot of talent at that running back position. It's going to get them the ball, or I think they're going to be tricky. I think they're going to do a lot of end arounds or, that pitch play that he likes where that Mullen and Meyer ran a ton of with Aaron Hernandez. So I think you're going to see a lot of that as well.
Yeah. All right. I'm going to feed you a couple more, and then we'll kind of wrap it up and get you out of here. But the next one I have for you is Michael Pirine over under 1,000 yards rushing.
I'm gonna go over because I think that he's a great player. There's going to be a couple games in there that I think that he'll be able to really pad his stats. I don't think that he'll go over by many. I'm thinking maybe 1,100 or less, somewhere in that 1,000 to 1,100. Florida hasn't had 1,000-yard rusher in a few seasons now, and then before that it had been
Kelvin Taylor, I believe, in 2015.
Yeah, Kelvin Taylor, and then before that, I think it had been 5 or 6, 7 years before that. Even 1,000-yard rusher is not something that happens very often. I do think that Michael Pirine has all of the talent in the world. It really depends on what they do with Malik Davis and Dameon Pierce, but I definitely think that there's a pretty big gap. Whereas last year, LaMichael Pirine was was a little bit better, in my opinion, than Jordan Scarlett. But, they're really kind of 1A, 1B. I truly think that this year you have your 1 and then 2A, 2B instead of that 1A, 1B.
And Mike Gillisley actually ran for 1,000 yards, I believe, in 2012, right?
He may have, and
I think he was the first one since like 2004, since like Seatric Faison to do that.
Then that's maybe what the stat was. So
yeah.
But you see, so in the last 15 years, they've had 3 players run for 1,000 yards. It's tough to do, and Florida has question marks at the offensive line position. I may amend. No, I'm going to stick with what I have to stand in the paint. That's the decision I make. He's going to run for more than 1,000 yards.
All right, we got Dan standing in the paint. Who's trying to dunk on him?
Yeah, I was about to back off and be like, "Well, you have some question marks at offensive line," but I'm going to stand in the paint on this one.
All right, man. All right, so I'm just going to feed you one more. And I think this is going to be a pretty interesting one. C.J. Henderson, over or under 3.5 sacks.
So that's really interesting. That's a tough one. It really depends on a number of things. But I'm going to say under, but I'm going to say under only by a little bit. I think that he's going to have 3 sacks. And the biggest reason I say that is because I think that Florida does have some question marks at the depth behind C.J. Henderson. So with that being said, I think that there's still some question marks with some of the safeties when it comes to coverage. So I don't know if they're going to totally trust him or I don't know if they totally want to rush him a bunch. He's fast and he's good, but I also think you throw Marco Wilson in there as well. So I think that the 2 of them might have 5.5 sacks between the 2 of them, but I don't think that he'll have more than 3.
He actually had 3 last season, and my logic for coming up with the 3.5 was kind of with Marco being back. I feel like that, and this defense kind of knowing where they're supposed to be, playing a little bit faster, that Grantham might bring him a lot more this season in hopes to get some pressure on the quarterback, because last year I feel like CJ, even though he had 3 sacks, he kind of had to play more of a cover role. But now that you have Marco back, you never know.
Yeah, you make a good point. I was just looking at that Colorado State, Mississippi State, and Michigan. Ooh, yeah, I don't know. That Grantham defense is so aggressive. I'm not going to stand in the paint in this one. I'll say he'll get more. And the reason I'm changing my mindset is because it reminds myself, despite how many times that I've said this, how aggressive Grantham's defense is. And this can be a bad thing, too. Just being aggressive doesn't mean necessarily that everything always works out in your favor. So I can see him getting more than 3.5 sacks. You know what? No. I'm going to stand in the paint again. I think because you have Marco Wilson, who will, also rush the quarterback at that DB blitz position, that the 2 of them collectively will have more. Here, this is what I'll say. The 2 of them will have more than if you were to – so 3.5 times 2 is 7. I think the 2 of them will have more than 7 sacks.
Okay. All right. I like that. All right, so at the end of recording this podcast, I stumbled across a couple of technical difficulties, but luckily Dan and I already got everything that we wanted to say on recording, and so you're not really missing anything. Basically, I just thanked him for coming on the podcast, as I truly appreciate him taking his time to come on. And if you haven't, be sure to check out the Stadium Miguel podcast with Dan Thompson, Ahmad Black, and Corey Knowles. Man, it's a really good podcast, and especially if you're a Florida fan, and be sure to check that out. And, they're always having big time guests on, whether it be former players or UF staff members that they've had recently. It's very informational and really good. And I like what they're doing with that podcast. So be sure to check them out. But that's going to do it for this edition of the Section 111 podcast. And I truly appreciate all you all tuning in and previewing the Florida Gators upcoming season. And as a Florida fan, I'm hopeful, that we're going to have a good season, and I'm looking forward to it. As always, I hope that you all learned something. I hope that you gained some new perspective, and most importantly, I hope you all were entertained. But thanks for tuning in to this edition of the Section 111 podcast.